Yeah, the skill is knowing not to let too much fish into your net.
Who'd sit there and watch a patch of fish for 20 minutes before he'd shoot it.
The boys, the deckhands, would be along the side of the boat throwing stones into the water to scare the fish back across the net.
Mainly towards the end we actually used SKSs, and
you know, every day was different. So you just didn't expect anything. You just appreciated whatever the morning gave you that day, you know. And if you could hold on to your cup of tea, because you were.
He was the master fisherman, mate. I admired him. He used to hear the fish talking and then catch them.
Purse-Seining nets are used worldwide to catch a number of pelagic species, including tuna, pilchards, salmon, and in this case, jack mackerel. It had been long known that large schools of jack mackerel appeared off the east coast of Tasmania during the summer months. In 1947, Bill Warren, with his boat the Eden Star, using a Purse-Seining net borrowed from the CSIRO, managed to land a couple of 15-ton shots. In 1973, a company was formed by David Waller and Max Cohen to capitalise on this resource. A fish meal factory was built at Triabunna, and 2 Purse-Seiners, the Irene M and Janet D, were built in Korea to catch the fish, as John Salmon recalls.
Main persons were David Wallach and Max Cohen. The fishing side of it, the water side of it, was very, very good. That worked, but the problem was the factory was what I'm led to believe it was only a casein, there was a milk drying plant, and it never really worked properly, and that was the bugbear of it, and that stopped. And after sort of 18 months, I think roughly 72, 73, somewhere 71, somewhere in there. 73 was there, yes, and then but it just stopped all of a sudden, and the South Africans came in under Australian Fisheries Development in about 1984.
The site's second life began with the arrival of Thornton Booth, a fishing entrepreneur from South Africa. He imported from a failed fishing enterprise in Yemen the factory barge Batangi and 3 Purse-Seiners, the Diana Averill, Vivian Jane and Lella. The boats came as deck cargo on a ship. This fuzzy old photo shows one of them being lifted off in the Tamar River. Other boats were also fishing for the barge, notably the Marine Countess, Maria Louisa and Leonard Star. Michael Dyer was engineer on the Leonard Star.
The raw product, the mackerel would come in and they used to pump it off your boat with no water. They used to have a dry vacuum system where they'd literally just suck it out of your tank with like a big vacuum cleaner, and they didn't want any water in the tanks, no refrigeration. It was just bring them in bulk. They sucked it out of your tanks and then they cooked it and it turned it into a fish meal product, and they sold that fish meal product as fertiliser or proteins and so forth to the agriculture industry, I think. So that was our first introductory to it, and it was a high volume, lots of fish, low quality, just get as much as you can, as quick as you can. And the locals did it very well. They were catching, I think, about 40,000 tonne a year when I first went there in 83, 84.
With the quantity of fish coming in, the Batangi proved too small for the job. A large factory was built ashore on the site of the first factory.
Yeah, well, we moved off the Batangi up, the main factory up on land, and we helped build that. And then we operated, they carted the Batangi off, and we carried on out there working the plant there.
In 1987, the opportunity arose to acquire another 4 boats from the same failed fishing enterprise in Yemen. Booth, unable to raise the finance, brought Launceston boat builder Alan Fogarty in as partner to purchase and refit the boats ready for fishing. The boats became Fogarty's stake in the whole enterprise.
I think it was a very good deal that they got through from the Yemenis government. When we went there, the 4 boats were tied up alongside each other, and they'd been there for something like 5 years, 4 years, 5 years just tied up, not working, rusting away, and just had a crew on board, and they, as the generators broke down, they just moved from one boat to the next boat to the next boat until they were talking about, I don't know exactly what it was, but it wasn't very much money. It cost more to bring the boats out on the ship than what it actually cost to buy the boats, and it had huge amounts of spare parts, and so it was a really good deal. And obviously they were perfect boats for what they were. They were designed to Purse-Seine. They weren't boats converted into Purse-Seiners. They were built as Purse-Seiners. Everything had backup, but they were perfect boats for doing that job.
They floated them off the boat, took them up the Tamar River, and we refurbished them, completely sandblasted, painted, and come up with 5 30-metre Purse-Seiners. Really nice little ships they were.
They were originally known as the calf boats, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. However, Calf 1 became Diana Averill and the others were renamed CTAS 2, 3, 4 and 5. The schools of Mackeral were spotted from light aircraft and the boats directed by radio.
Mackerel, you can see the colour through the water underneath the big schools. Only be maybe 1/3 of the schools surfacing. The rest, as you can see, underneath, hundreds and hundreds of tonnes, some of the schools. You can see them for miles. If the sun was shining, you could probably see them 20, 25 miles away. That was, they just glistened like gold dollar coins on their edge. You can just see them for a mile.
Half the day you're laying out in the sun just waiting for the aeroplane to spot the fish. Then it was flat out for an hour.
Once the boats arrived at the school or schools, other skills came into play. Jim Shea was engineer on the Lella. The skipper was a Norwegian, Marinus Larsen.
There might be quite a few schools, and he'd just sturge around amongst them all, and then he'd get over the top of the biggest one. And when they started to move, ready to catch, he sort of knew that, what they was doing under there. He'd move off them, and as soon as they'd come up and surfaced, if they was ready, he'd shoot them, because he knew if they're not ready when you shoot them, they'll swim out.
It was important that the fish spotter could estimate the size of a school, and this skill only came with experience.
All I can tell you is I just got a bit of a drift for it because the skippers used to ask them how many tonnes you get. So you build up a bit of a repertoire as you go along after some time. So you say, oh, I've got 60 tonne, I've got 100 tonne, so you can just put that in your memory bank and you can tell roughly, what's in it. Because some schools were that big, you didn't even take the boat to it because they would have ripped their nets. Really, in the good days, you're picking out not the big schools, but the smaller ones. That was, massive. Some of them, like hard to believe, but like a football field.
One time there, we were down off Fortescue, and there was mackerel everywhere. And Larsen's going round and round and round, and it was a massive school. And he went round and round and round, and then they went down. That was it. And I said, "What was the trouble, Larsen?" He said, "Too many, Jim. About 3,000 tonne, all schooled, and he couldn't get a school off the big heap, so he left him alone. No, broken net. If he was going to bugger the net up, broken net, Jim." So he moved away. There was 4 boats there, round and round and round, and he moved away in towards Fortescue, bang, let it go, and we got 160 tonne and went home. And the others were still hanging around the big school, so we were back in time in the morning to get another couple 100 tonnes, because he knew them that well.
You don't want to be dumping fish if you can help it. Was quite good in Tassie because we had the 4 boats, so if you ended up with too much fish, you'd bring another boat alongside and put that fish onto that boat so nothing got wasted. So, Yeah, the skill is knowing not to let too much fish into your net. Over down there, that did happen. If too much fish went into the net, they'd obviously push it down, and it can actually turn the net inside out, and the net cork line, instead of being on your starboard side, ends up on your port side under the boat, and you've got to go in, put the net on, it's got a twist in, you've got to take it off the boat, take the twist out of it. So, yeah, don't be too greedy.
We had a South African skipper who flew out from South Africa. He was a specialist in pelagic fishing, and he was brilliant. His name was Harold. He taught us a lot about sonar fishing, nighttime fishing. Very calm, amazing skipper who'd sit there and watch a patch of fish for 20 minutes before he'd shoot it, and he rarely missed. We used to get really good catch rates with Harold. He was a pleasure to work with.
Purse-Seining, it all happens at once, and the skill is to stop the problems before they actually get out of hand, because it's like a chain reaction, and things can go wrong very quickly. The skill is knowing what to do when things go wrong, rather than being skilled in actually doing it. So that seems to be about the main skill.
When you start to purse-seine, you find a patch of fish, you run down the side of them, then shoot the net round them, like the net's getting run out as you run down the side.
You've got to go flat out like you're doing 10 knots. If the boat does 10 knots, that's what you do.
Then you turn around and go around the back and back to the start of your net. Then you've got a big sheet of net that's dropping down into the water. At the boat where it comes together, there's a gap under the boat. Until it's pursed off and closed right up, there's a big gap there. So if the fish swim to the other side of the net, they've got to go a long way down to find the bottom and get out, which they don't do, they'll stay pretty high up. And you can purse off nice neatly and you've got them. But if they come back towards the boat, they can dive under the boat and you lose the whole lot.
They do swim very hard, and sometimes it was hard getting around the fish. And that's when the nets were a little bit shorter when we first started. They added another 50 fathom, made another 5 fathom, so the nets become 450 fathom long and 75 fathom deep. When we first started, they were 400 by 70.
So they used to carry bags of stones. They used to get rotten rock from one of the quarries here, and the boys, the deckhands, would be along the side of the boat throwing stones into the water to scare the fish back across the net. And they used to go to the pub, and a lot of them, they'd say, someone said, "What do you do on the boat?" He said, "I throw stones at fish." You know, because, "Oh, you're mad, you're mad." You know.
And we used to throw rocks, but then the factory complained because the rocks had come up into the net, and then we'd pump them on board, and then they'd take them out into the factory, and it was all bluestone metal, and it didn't go. It used to go into the machine, into the factory, and cause a problem. So, but that got stopped.
Someone got the bright idea of using automatic rifles to turn the fish.
Well, someone gets up on the foredeck and shoots in the front of the school.
Mainly towards the end, we actually used SKSs, and in those days you could buy an SKS for $300, and we used to buy 1,000 rounds at a time, just pop her in front of the fish and keep them in the net.
I reckon 8 out of 10 times you'd turn them, just, you know, and the top would turn, so the whole lot would turn.
Guys catching skipjack in the Pacific, they use tuna bombs, and so the Norwegians use those little bombs that you can drop in the water. It's only gunpowder, it's not any other explosive, but they called them tuna bombs. When the Leroy came over, they had some on what they were using. It sounded like dynamite going off, but then they caused a bit of havoc in the town where the guys let playing like big crackers, and so that got stopped as well.
And it was the most successful way they had of actually chasing them back in.
We used to shoot clean patches of jack mackerel. Every now and again you get some slimy mackerel, that they call them, we used to call them slimy. I think they're called horse mackerel as well. But mainly jack mackerel. I remember we did a couple of shots around seaweed, which was fun, getting that out of the net.
They shot a patch of fish there one day and they thought, well, they didn't know what they was. We ended up getting 40 tonne of snotty trevally, big ones about that long. I was in a bit of a predicament there. Anyway, we brought them in. We weren't allowed to process them. We had to, wasn't allowed to put them through the fish meal plant. So they headed and gutted them and processed them and froze them down and sent them away to charity.
The bycatch on a mackerel boat was probably under 1%.
Any dolphins?
I've never seen a dolphin caught in any of the boats, and I never heard of one being caught. A lot of seals, but they used to jump out of the net anyway. Like when you pursed it up, it was coming in, they just jumped over the top. The odd one or two would get down into the bag and end up coming up in the bag.
And they come through up over the roller and down into the net bin. So you've got to get them out. I could get them out. The others wanted to get into them with sticks or something like that. But I'd go up to them and they'd get cross, you know. So I'd give them a big open hander across the ears, just as hard as I could swing, bang, in the ear. And they'd, and they will come on, and I'd lead them out of the net, and they'd follow me, and get onto the deck, and then go and jump over the side. And a couple of them there come out of the net and had a fair bit of deck around it, and they would have sat there for 20 minutes or more, just looking around what we're doing and having a bit of a scratch and a look.
The seals, when they got a net, they would swim round the back of the net, and of course the fish would take off from them and go straight under the boat. So they were a nuisance. They really were a pest when you were fishing. But it didn't take them long to know how to muck you up. They was pretty clever at it. But
we've had interaction with seals, and we also had interaction with dolphins. Not very much, and we worked in really good with the government. The government people really helped us, and they understood that we were trying to get over all these problems. We were going through a time of big change. So one issue was dolphins at night time, and we didn't know any of this. They actually go down to the bottom and go asleep. They close one eye, believe it or not, and they all go down together. So we stopped fishing at night time and focused on daytime, and that alleviated that problem. And that took a little bit of experience from outside to help us with all this, to help us understand it, because there wasn't much science on that at the time.
The whole operation was really heavily scrutinised by AFMA and by they had Antarctic Division observers, and there was people from all over. Everyone wanted a piece of what they were doing, you know.
We worked the seal problem out because we had a trap in the net where they were allowed, not a trap, an escape hatch, and that let the seals out. And since then, very, very good man in the Australian fishing industry, very, very good fisherman actually. He's actually worked out on how to he worked the system out on how to stop the interaction with dolphins and seals, which very, very clever man. So all that just come through experience and, you know, just working in with people and people working for the right reasons.
Jim speaks here of the whale's sonar. That's their own sonar, their echolocation thing, causing the mackerel to scatter and disperse.
And when the whales are there, as soon as the sonar hit them, they'd be around, and as soon as the sonar hit the schools, they spread out. Now they're quite happy, but they knew if they go into a big group, the whales got them. So nature lets them all, they just go wild. He'd have good.
What, they scatter when the whales are there?
They hear the sonar and they know it's a whale, see? So if they're in a big school, they go through and scoop the lot up. and they spread and they miss a lot, you know.
When all the boats were catching well, unloading could have its challenges.
And it was like some nights we'd be home here in bed when we wasn't working. We'd get a phone call, the boat's coming in at midnight tonight. So we had to be out there waiting on the wharf to pump it because the boat wanted to unload and go back to sea again. He didn't want to sit around. So we'd go and unload them, and then they'd queue up, the boats wouldn't all want to be unloaded. Some would go back to sea with half a load because they'd missed the morning shot. And
We were told we had to catch as much fish as we could, and that's what we did. Unloading was a bit of a problem sometimes. It used to take a lot to get unloaded. It used to take 6 hours to pump the boat out. So if you were the third boat in, you'd miss the next day. And so, yeah, as I say, there was a lot of competition, really. But it was good though.
Even with the new factory in operation, there were problems processing the huge volumes of fish.
you know, the boats them days was catching a lot of fish. I think we caught 45,000 tonne one year, and the factory just couldn't handle it. And a lot of the fish was going rotten. And when you tried to process rotten fish, you just couldn't put it through the press to press the oil out of it. It just went to mush. And yeah, so it was pretty hard work. It was long, hot, hard work. And a lot of the fish you had to dump it on the floor to put it back in again, you know. And it was a circus, I can tell you. It was, and then when we'd pump, sometimes like they had a hectolitre machine up in the factory, we'd pump the fish off. It'd go up through the hectolitre machine, and it'd click, 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 and it'd work out the tonnage they had on. Oh, I had 100 tonne on, I only got 80, you're robbing us, we're doing this and doing that. We got blamed for not reading hectolitres properly, but you couldn't touch it. That once they started, we couldn't wipe them off. So they used to send them, one of their deckies up to sit on there to watch that we didn't rob them from fish. And, you know, half the time they'd pump the fish into the hull of the boat, there'd be a mountain in there, like, you know. But if they had a bit of rough weather, they'd settle out of rock and to level off, they'd come in at 200 tonne. And they'd come in another time, but it's like a pinnacle. Oh, you got 160 tonne, where's the rest? You robbed me 40 tonne, Reno. But so there was a lot of fun and games there, I can tell you, you know.
Well, you talk about fish being wasted. Why wasn't someone controlling the amount of fish coming in and telling the boats to stop fishing?
Well, you couldn't tell the fishermen to stop fishing.
I guess from the factory side point of view, there probably was a problem with oversupply, but as far as the fishermen went, there wasn't, because we were there to make money and we were told we had to catch as much fish as we could, and that's what we did.
They'd come in, if they all filled up with 200 tonne each, which they were doing, you know, like, and we had a breakdown in the plant. Well, they'd put you, which was a lot of breakdowns, and we'd just put behind it, you just couldn't keep up with it. And once it went into the pits, the big concrete pits, 100 tonne pits, you couldn't just pump it out. You had to run it out through the conveyors and through the plant to get rid of it again, you know. So, no, it was a horror show, actually a horror show. But when the fish was good and they weren't catching them any, when the weather had come rough, we could handle it nice and easy. But when they started fetching big mobs in, well, you certainly had a bloody problem on your hand.
With the low prices and problems at the Tribunna plant, the owners of Leonard Star sought greener pastures.
Left there, the owner of our boat had bigger ideas, and he got a contract with Uncle Ben's, from memory, for fresh product, for cat food. So we went to Hobart because we could get more money for the fish. We refrigerated the fish, we looked after them when we put them in isolated bins, and they would get freighted to Melbourne to Uncle Ben's, and we used to get 5 or 6 times the amount of money for a quarter of the amount of fish. And we were living in Hobart. It was fantastic. Hobart was one of the best places I've ever worked out of. Our challenge was getting the fish to Melbourne, not as much catching them, whereas the local fleet was just catch as much as you can.
Initially, one of the disadvantages of unloading in Hobart was that the boat didn't have a pump to pump the fish out of the hold. It had to be done manually.
We'd have to get into, back in them days, we actually would have to climb down into the well, and we had this great big like net and pull it down under and you know, scoop the fish into it and then lift it up. And as it lifted up, all the water and slime and everything would come down on you. But
and the Marie Louisa used to also come down at the end of the tuna fishery, and they used to catch their fair share too. So at some stages there, I think one year there was 6 of us. There was 3 locals, Chris from Lakes Entrance, the Leonard Star and the Marie Louisa fishing there one year.
The Leonard Star was also unique in having a female cook.
you know, every day was different. So you just didn't expect anything. You just appreciated whatever the morning gave you that day, you know. And if you could hold on to your cup of tea, because you were.
So your day to get the coffee.
Coffee was number one. Coffee was definitely number one, because no one wanted to be out, you know. And then they would go out to get ready, and the boys would do all their stuff, and then I'd start cooking. So, and I would just, you know, I'd bake a cake, or I'd do whatever I wanted to do. Really, I really had quite a free reign. Like there was no one telling anybody what they had to do. It was just, we just did it, you know. Like we all knew that we had to supply breakfast, dinner, and tea. It wasn't rocket science, you know. And it was just like you were having 7 mates around for tea. You know, I'd just put a roast on. While the roast was cooking, I could go up and watch these boys and appreciate just how hard they were working. Like they were bloody hard workers when they worked, and funny blokes when they weren't.
Bioluminescence is a naturally occurring but random phenomenon in our oceans.
Certain times of year there used to be a lot of phosphorus in the water in where we were fishing. So Harold again taught us to, we used to black out the boat, and you know, you used to cup your cigarettes so there'd be no light and your eyes would all adjust to the darkness. And he actually showed us, you could see a patch of fish up to 3/4 mile or a mile away just through the phosphorus in the water. Just that patch of fish would be swirling the water around enough so the glow of the phosphorus, you could literally see that patch of fish as good as you'd see some in the daylight sometimes. And so certain times of year we used to go night fishing, and it was the most exciting time. It was so easy. You get your net around the fish, they wouldn't move, and there was no weight in the patch because they were just happily sitting there. You just sneak around them slowly, and you could pump them on board without any duress to anything. It was a completely different. I'd never seen anything like it, and that was due to Harold. He just taught us how to do that, and he'd done it obviously in South Africa, and it was the first we'd ever heard of it. It was incredible.
This fishery took place on the east coast of Tasmania, one of the prettiest coastlines in Australia. Some didn't appreciate where they were, some did.
Well, you're out in nature. You are literally surrounded by the elements. You're surrounded by something that could suck you in as quick as that. You feel quite humble, you know, like you've got rough seas. Every day is different, you know. Every day you could have rough, you could have calm, you could have whatever. You could have dolphins swimming past down that way. I reckon there was even a sighting of those killer whales went past. You know, every day was different. So you just didn't expect anything. You just appreciated whatever the morning gave you that day. The scene met the sky. Like you have the moonlight and the sea light, and how do you describe that in words?
As mentioned earlier, Thornton Booth and Alan Fogarty were in partnership with the Patangi, the CTAS boats and the factory. A partnership that was not without its problems, which is not uncommon in partnerships.
He was there probably for about 3 years or 4 years, until him and Fogarty had a falling out. Is when these big new boats came. They went, boats? Yeah. There was a bit of a financial problem. I think things were being paid, and they fell out. And then so Alan took over the whole show as far as the factory with sea fish goes, and Then he was there for a couple of years, and then it went into receivership, and the receivers ran it for maybe 12 months. Then Silverman's, Bill Silverman, their family bought the factory, and that's who were there right sort of to the end and then another company from Norway came in. It was Andre Remoy. I don't know what the company's name, but it was Andre Remoy came in with Leroy.
The fishing had always varied from year to year, but by the early 2000s, the stock was on a steady downward trend.
We didn't catch them all, but they just the sea currents and temperatures changed. The mackerel weren't coming in shore close enough for them to catch with the Purse-Seiners. They're all offshore and deeper water, and this, over a period of 4 or 5 years, they just quietly folded down.
But just where they are now, don't know. We didn't catch them all.
When the surface fish or the purse-seinable fish disappeared, they went mid-watering, and they were mainly mid-watering red bait. And I think that was going into Lincoln and maybe into the Japanese market for longline bait. But that's when Brendan Callagher came on board with the Saxon Onward, and first of all they just used a Saxon, then they converted the Leroy over to mid-watering as well. But then they were trying to, I think they might have gone pair trawling.
Pair trawling is a method of fishing where one mid-water trawl is towed by 2 vessels, therefore no need for heavy trawl doors to pull through the water.
Pair trawling is very, very effective. It's 2 boats towing a single net, because we work with a big boat called the Leroy. We had 2 boats, one was the Saxon Onward and one was the Leroy. And the Leroy had great carrying capacity. So we were able to get very, very good trips, and we had great success with the pair trawling. One of the major benefits with that was that we could go deeper, and the fish were out on the edge and they were in deeper water. So we weren't restricted by depth, and we could go to the fish, as opposed to the purse-seiners had to wait for the fish to come up to them.
The fish, being deep, cannot be spotted from the air, requiring another set of skills.
Yeah, well, that come with a bit of experience and a bit of time on the grounds, and we were very, very lucky to have, we had a high range sonar and a low range sonar, and with good sounders and great electronic equipment on the net, on the top of the net. We had also a net sonar, and then down the bag of the net we could see when we were catching fish. So over time you get better at it, and it took a bit of experience, but we were blessed with some really good men around us, good skippers, good engineers, some people come from overseas to help us and give us estimates on electronic gear and that, which was a major help, as they had great experience on that particular issue. We had to move on and buy a single mid-water trawler, and we bought it out of Iceland, and her name was Edlidi. Very successful boat, great power, good for mid-water trawling, good carrying boat, and she done very, very well. And with the Edlidi, she was just a single pelagic trawler, and very, very strong boat, and we used to pump off the side of the boat. She had a bit of age to her, so she needed a bit of loving and attention every trip, but it was a good boat.
Eventually Brendan moved on from a lady, and Chris Healy took over as skipper. A young Ben Mass was his first mate.
Yeah, it was the biggest boat I'd worked on. It was 52 metres, great big boat. Just get lost on it. Also very interesting, the gear was so big, and the mid-water gear, I wasn't used to working with that, so the whole thing was a big learning curve for me. really big catches. The catches were all like we would do 100 tonne in a night, all the time, and unfortunately it wasn't enough for that boat. It was such a big boat. 100 tonne seems like it's lots of fish, but it wasn't enough.
By the time Ben joined the Alidi, the vessel was no longer permitted to fish in state waters. They had to fish outside the 3 nautical mile limit. The regulations were tightening.
100% observer coverage. We weren't allowed to go to sea without observers. And they had cameras. We had cameras mounted in the net. So there was like a live video recording of the entire shot, and we weren't allowed to deploy the net without that. And what else did we have going on? The bycatch reduction, but like they call them like just a turtle excluder on a really big scale, and weren't allowed to fish without that either. So yeah, those sort of things that hadn't had those on other boats before, where you'd had such scrutiny of what you were doing. We'd do around 400 tonne a trip, maybe 500.
The target fish were no longer jack mackerel, but red bait.
They wanted the oil, or the high oil content, and the red bait had a higher oil content. So that's what and if they were the right size, perfect size, and we could test for the oil content, if they were the right fish and they were cared for properly, they'd freeze them and sell them for tuna feed for the bluefin tuna farms. So, and that achieved a higher price, and allegedly if we could do that often enough we'd make a bonus or make more money from that, but that didn't ever happen. Of the night time up and down the east coast of Tassie there, the red bait's like a carpet. There's huge marks of fish that go for miles, and it's thousands of tonnes. The net was physically still on the bottom. It was not hard down like a demersal trawl, but it was tickling the bottom. So you still needed good bottom. You could fish it purely in the midwater, but for the mackerel and redbait it wasn't successful. They'd filter out of the net, but you could put them into the net, and as you towed it, they'd swim with it and slowly filter out. And when you went, like, you could have had hundreds of tonnes in the net, but when you winch up, there was nothing there. There's nothing in the cod end. So to get them to flow back into the cod end, you had to physically land the net on the bottom, and the trawl we were towing had I reckon it had a 58 metre headline height, that's how high the net was fishing, which is quite big. But if you fished it fully open like that, it still didn't work. We'd close it down, you'd shoot wire, and as the net spread on the bottom, you'd lose the headline height, and we'd get it to around 40 metres, and then with the net collapsed at that point, the meshes had closed down a little bit, and then the fish had stopped filtering out, and they'd flow back into the cod end.
Unlike other trawl fish such as orange roughy with a swim bladder that will expand and float the net as it gets near the surface, mackerel and red bait were a dead weight. Monitoring what went into the net was paramount.
Don't want to take any chances with them in bad weather, because they're so heavy, and you can come into a lot of problems with busting gear and bags away and that, and a danger to fishermen on the decks and all that sort of stuff. So for the best part, we always stayed away from bad weather, and we're very, very cautious of it. And in that fishery, you had to be.
And the brailer had catch sensors on it. So if we caught the fish and they went into the net, the catch sensor had a trigger. As the net expanded with the fish, it pulled on a wire, and it'd send a signal back to the boat that you'd caught. There was three or four of them. I reckon they were like a 50 tonne interval. And so as each one triggered, you knew, we've caught this much, hang on, that's enough, we'll winch this up, we've got enough now. which was a good thing to have, because if you didn't want to catch too much. If you caught too much, it would be a problem.
We had one instance which was very, very dangerous. A little bit of experience helped us along, but our catch sensors didn't work on the net, and gee, we got a serious bag of fish in a very short time. So it was sort of the perfect storm. It all happened at one time, and then when we went to winch, we couldn't winch the net open. We were going, what the hell's going on here? And we ended up towing the net right in ashore into 10 metres of water, and then we were able to get it up to the side of the boat, and it was absolutely full, which is a mistake you don't want to make, but that happens. It's part of the learning process, and the trouble was that we destroyed a beautiful net and a beautiful bag, which was very expensive at the time. That whole setup that I'm talking about, that was over $100,000 worth. Absolutely a very, very bad day on the rig. Very bad day on the rig.
Many pelagic fish rise through the water column to feed at night and return to the deeps through the day. Therefore, fishing through the day created problems with bycatch, principally barracuda.
So yeah, the cuda were too much trouble to be bothered with, and you avoid them. And yeah, because they floated, you couldn't handle them. You couldn't get them in the fish pump. You couldn't get them to bloody get out, and then to let them go and feed the seals with them that's the wasteful. And you get a 80 tonne, 100 tonne of barracuda, and yeah, it was just it was a big drama. So yeah, it was just not worth fishing in the day. We'd save the fuel and save the trouble.
Unlike the purse-seiners, which shot and hauled the net over the side of the boat, the board trawlers either hauled the net up the stern ramp or brought it around to the side of the boat for pumping the fish out while still in the water, as in this case.
The mid-water gear on a leady, you'd have a great big bag of fish, and it's really heavy and sinking, and yeah, it's hard to imagine that big bag of fish, but we'd winch it around to the side of the boat, and you can't see it, it's sunken under the boat, and then bring up the cod end. We'd have a loose bit of the cod end left that had no fish in it, and you'd put the fish pump, you'd mount the fish pump into that loose bit of cod end and chain it, because it's so heavy we had to use chain the net onto the fish pump, and then lower the fish pump on we had big hydraulic hoses. It was hydraulically driven, and they'd be on a big winch on the deck, and you'd lower the pump down until the net was hanging at a point that it'd feed into the pump. And then you didn't want to pump. You could pump it real fast, but it wouldn't get enough water, so you could block up the hose, which was a big drama. You'd lose a lot of fish to sort that out. But you just pump it at a nice rate where you got a lot of fish going through, but a good bit of water too. And we'd pump. In an hour, you'd pump 100 tonne.
In 2008, for economic reasons and lack of fish, the Aledi was sold off and the fish mill closed. It was all over bar the shouting. The smaller Purse-Seiner Seabell worked for a while, freezing the catch for tuna feed and pet food, but her owners too had to cease fishing through lack of fish. It was all over.
It was very seasonal, some good seasons, some ordinary ones. But the biggest problem what we had in the finish was what we have everywhere today is water, too warm. So the krill wasn't there, they were somewhere else. One season there was a stack of fish, the next season there was zilch.
I think the fish moved on, to tell you the truth. I know a lot of people don't believe in global warming, but I didn't at the start, but I do now. The fish just got less and less and harder to find. All depends whether it was El Nino or La Nina, one of the two. One one would fish a lot better than the other. We actually had two types of fisheries. One was a local fishery and a migrating fishery, and I think the migrating fishery topped up the local fishery each year, and then we fished that mainly, and some of the migrating fish, but we did find we were fishing further south and south every year, and then they basically disappeared.
The Tasmania was a whole different ball game for us. We were used to going out in the bight, and we were on a Purse-Seining obviously, so we'd shoot the net around a pole boat and they'd hold the fish for us. When we got to Tassie, the locals down there were in a league of their own. They were fishing more European style, using skip wires and sonars, and really exciting fishery. We learned a lot. We had to learn a lot. Had to change the boat around a bit. It was a lot faster. They were doing 3 or 4 shots a day if they needed to, whereas we were used to doing one and using skiffs and lots of people, whereas down there it's all sort of short crews and fast fishing and a lot more exciting. It was a great fishery.
It was a great experience. It was a very good experience. It was quite, when we first went there, it was lots of fun, and then everyone got very serious and it turned into a bit of a competition, but no, it was terrific. I wouldn't change anything.
Mate, at that stage, like the roughy boats were going at the same time, and for engineers and mates and that, there was more money in the roughy boats, and but for the local people here, like for the locals that and the crews, it was quite a good milking cow for them. Like they made good when it was going. They made not bad money.
Yeah, I enjoy fishing. I like catching fish, but that fishing, yeah, like you were feeding fish farms, and you were feeding. Like it was for salmon farms and tuna farms, and they say that's sustainable. They reckon that the salmon farms are sustainable fishing, but when you look at this is what we were doing and this is what we were extracting from the ocean for their alleged sustainable operation. I don't know. If we were doing the fishing to feed people, that's different. That's you know, there's a purpose in it.
It was actually quite a passionate time. There was some fantastic experienced people around us, from fishermen to engineers to people that were in the factory on the site and people we learned off. There was one fish meal maker down in Tasmania, Fred, and gee, he was a lovely man to learn off. And then there was heaps of others, Brian Hawkins. I don't really want to name people, but colleague Goodinson was an engineer that was just exceptional. He had a great depth of knowledge and fixing and helping, and across the board, and heaps of other people. I had a great partner that was very supportive of me. That's a business partner, and yeah, it was a good time. It was challenging. I had every day wasn't a good day. We had some bad days.
Mackerel fishing doesn't float my boat. I don't think mackerel fishing really floated too many boats, but the camaraderie, the team, the experience, I'd do it all again.
But fishing in Tasmania was certainly a highlight for me. It's just such a beautiful place to live in. I ended up doing 7 years or 8 years in Tasmania throughout the orange roughy fishery or the mackerel fishery. I enjoyed every day I was there. It's a beautiful place, great fisheries, fantastic coastlines, everything's close. A lot different in fishing in South Australia. You've got to steam 200 mile before you even get there, whereas in Tasmania it's all right at your door. Great people, great food, and I'll visit there any chance I get.